I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to the last of our 125-year celebration events this evening, very kindly sponsored by Oxford Academic Health Science Network. My name's Liz Westcott. I'm Department Head for Nursing here, and it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you and also our very prestigious panel to this question and answer event. A few housekeeping things first. We don't have a fire alarm planned at all, so if there is one, the exits are at the back and also down here. And also, if I could ask you just to put your mobile phones onto silent in case they have any unusual ringtones that you might not want everybody to hear. So, just to talk a little bit about what we've been doing for the last year. We started planning these events about 2.5 years ago. And I'd like to give an enormous vote of thanks to all the working and steering group members. We've had staff from our faculty and across Brookes and our alumni. We've had members of the Radcliffe Guild, and also thanks to the Radcliffe Guild for their financial contribution. We've had staff helping us from Oxford University Hospital and Oxford Health NHS Foundation Trusts. From Health Education England Thames Valley, who generously supported our lecture series, and also finally this evening Oxford Academic Health Science Network. So this year we've run 18 projects. We started our preparations with a drawing competition from local primary school children, and we asked them to draw what a nurse does. And the winners of that went into the booklet that we also have published. And that booklet detailed 13 decades of nursing, both in Oxford and Swindon. We've produced mugs, badges and wristbands, and I think every item of clothing I have now has a badge on it, so I don't forget to wear it. We've had a monthly prestigious lecture series, both here and in Oxford, and had speakers from all around the world, which has been fabulous. Our gardening team planted up tubs outside both Marsden Road and Ferndale with 125 in box plants, which still look as though they're 125 12 months later. We had a fun run and, well, mainly walking in some cases, in my case, event in April in both Oxford and Swindon and raised over £1,000 for local charities. We've had a celebration dinner in March and a lunch in May for staff and student alumni. We had a wonderful student celebration tea in the week of the Queen's birthday, which was a great success as well. We contributed to International Nurses Week at the conference in the Oxford University Hospital Trust. Gives me great pleasure as well that we had our first honorary doctorates in nursing awarded in June and September, and I'm delighted that one of our honorary graduates, Dame Julie Moore, is here today. We had a lovely open afternoon hosted by Oxford Health in the grounds of the Warneford Hospital, and particularly thanks to Sue Byrne for being key in organising this. The annual Cowley Carnival is supported by Brookes each year, and we were very privileged this year for the health to be the focus for the Brookes contribution. So we had nurses, both staff and students, taking part in the parade. And after the parade, we had a stand where we took 250 blood pressures, not of the same person, I hasten to add, and also showed numerous adults and children how to do basic life support. In October, we had the annual St Frides-wide civic service, and that we had great privilege for that to be dedicated to nursing. And we also had the inaugural performance of our nurses' choir with a wonderful anthem written by Liz Justico, and they're going to perform it again this evening with a few members of the choir. So thank you very much for coming along. At the same time, there was a concurrent exhibition about nursing history and education in the town hall, and that was contributions from Tree Bentley and organised by Peter, Zanti, Rita and Sue, and we had about 800 people over the 2 weeks come to visit it, which was great. In November, we co-hosted the opening film in the Public Health Film Society, which was showing a very powerful film called Barbara's Story, which touched all of us, I think. And finally, this evening, we've got our prestigious panel talking about the future of nursing. And after this, we've got a reception in the building right next door, the Abercrombie building, and there's a lovely cake that we're going to cut. And also, at the start of the year, we had a tree that was designed by Tess Russell-Pears, one of our art students. And people were writing on leaves on the tree what nursing meant to them. And our tree has been populated during the year. And so if you want to read any of the remembrances about nursing, or if you'd like to write something yourself, then please do pop that on. So thank you again very much for coming along this evening, and we hope that you enjoy our session now. And I'd now like to call upon Professor Gary Ford, who's going to introduce our panel this evening. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Liz, and welcome to everybody for coming to this panel. We're very pleased to be supporting this panel on the future of nursing. As an academic health science network, we're always looking to how we can support pulling research and innovation into the health service to improve patients' outcomes and their experience. And in my own area of clinical practice, stroke, although you don't hear much about it in the general news, we know from the research that's been done that nursing input into stroke care is far more influential on patient mortality than the number of doctors on the ward, despite what Mr. Hunt might be saying. So nursing role is key, and like all professions, it will evolve and change. And it's really excellent that Liz has got an expert panel tonight from across the country. My role is just to introduce those, and so I'll just go through who we've got. We've got Dame Julie Moore, who's the Chief Executive of University Hospitals Birmingham NHS Foundation Trust, and probably known to many of you. Catherine Murphy, Chief Executive Officer for the Patients Association. Stacey Johnson, Associate Professor of Nursing at Nottingham University. Gary Rolfe, Emeritus Professor of Nursing at Swansea University. And from our own area, Ros Olsted, who's Director of Nursing and Clinical Standards at Oxford Health Foundation Trust. And then finally, Jenny Middleton from the Nursing Times, who's going to chair the panel tonight, and I'll hand over to Jenny and the panel now.
So, good evening, everybody. You could do better than that. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you. I'm expecting you to be a bit more lively than that. It's Christmas after all, you should be very happy. While the panel take their seats, I'm just going to just say again, I'm Jenny Middleton. I'm the editor of Nursing Times. So some of you who are nurses might know who I am, and some of you who are student nurses might know who I am, but the rest of you might not. And I guess to explain to you, I think they've invited me here to be a bit Jeremy Paxman, which is a bit worrying because that's not really my style, but I'll do my very best. But I'm hoping that you have some great questions to grill our panel with this afternoon. Can I just check? Who here is actually a registered nurse? Oh, okay. Lots of you, that makes sense. Who's a student nurse, training to be a nurse? Okay, good. Yay. So the choir, that's good. And who's not a nurse, but is a healthcare professional in another way? Good, you're in a minority, but thank you for coming. That's great. And who's not a healthcare professional, interested member of the public? Hand off your. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, it's lovely to have all of you here. You're very welcome. I've got a couple of questions which I'm going to start with the panel, but by all means, raise your hand and interrupt, because it's about what you want to get out of the debate and answering your questions. So feel free to shout at me if I haven't come to you and you want to ask questions. Also, there's a hashtag for tonight, which is, who's on Twitter? Raise your hand. Okay, good. We should be able to get some good tweets coming out. The hashtag is #FutureNursing, so feel free to tweet questions if you're a little bit shy, and we've got people in the audience who are going to alert me, should there be. Are you one of them? Are you the alerter? You're an alerter. Good, and you're an alerter as well, so you'll tell me, so you'll wave at me. And then there's roving mics for those of you who aren't shy and just really want to get a chance to, maybe belt out a tune, X Factor style, or ask a question about nursing, whatever. It's totally up to you. Okay, great. So I suppose welcome to the panel. So if you don't know who these people, esteemed people are in right order, so it's Catherine at the very far end, who's from the Patients Association, and Julie is a registered nurse who now has the honour of being a chief executive of UHB and is merging with Heartland. Stacey is the associate professor that we talked about earlier, and Ros is the local from Oxford, and then finally, but no means least, is our second Gary, which is Gary Roth. So that's the order in case you want to address a question specifically to them and you didn't know what they look like. So I'm going to start, actually, with you, Ross. So we had some pretty big announcements from Jeremy Hunt last week about nursing. Nurse apprenticeship and nurse associate, both schemes being launched. And obviously that is to bridge a severe nursing workforce shortage that we've got. What's your view on those roles? What's your view on what that might do actually to what it means to be a nurse? Big question, I'm sorry to start with you, but I know you can take it. Also, you're on your turf.
Yes, I'm on home ground. Can everyone hear me all right? I've got a loud voice, so that's okay. I think they are big announcements, and I think in nursing we're needing and ready to do things that are different, because I think certainly Julie and I, but when you're working within a clinical environment, I work within a community and mental health services trust, you have to be realistic about what's happening on the ground. And what's happening on the ground is you want your vacancies to be as low as possible, but we have a severe workforce shortage. So doing exactly the same as we've always done is something that isn't really an option, because we do have to really think about things differently. We take nursing associates first. Well, I've been a registered nurse for far too long now, for nearly 40 years, and that's nothing. So is a nursing associate something that's new, or is it something that's building on things that we had before, and maybe we lost the essence of a valuable member in the workforce? If we go and look at, I don't know if anyone here works in community services or if they work in district nursing services, but our colleagues here have associate practitioners working as part of their community nursing team, and they're really valued and successful members of those teams. So the difference between having an associate practitioner and an associate nurse will be regulated by the NMC. I personally welcome that, but these people work already in the workforce. They're valued members of the workforce. They're nothing new. So I think it is to be valued that we do have associate nurses as part of that wider team. In terms of the apprenticeships, again, well, none of us. It was not in none of our giving that we are moving towards all organisations who has a turnover of over £3 million having an apprenticeship levy. And that places a very different responsibility on all organisations, and including health organisations. So in order to not lose that money, it is important that we do create apprenticeships across the board and at all levels. So again, I think the key issue, and there has been an issue as to whether or not, and I was one of the first graduate nurses in the 1970s, and I'm a great supporter of graduate nursing. However, the connection between practice and education is something which I think we have maybe, we haven't got the right balance of that. And I think moving into having some of the nursing workforce being developed through apprenticeships is a real positive thing to be able to really rebalance some of that. So again, it's nothing that I think is drastic, and I do think we need to do different things in the workforce. So I'm a supporter of both of those things.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the academics to raise that issue you talked about there about having to train people differently. But first I'm going to ask the other person who's the provider on the panel. So nursing associate, nurse apprenticeship, you're a graduate nurse yourself. Do you feel that this changes the shape of what it is to be a nurse?
I remember when I started as a student way back when, a little bit after you, I think there was.
Yes, so much.
It's Christmas, Julie, play nice.
And my tutor at the time said, nursing has a very wide entry gate, and I think that is right, and it should be, because we need lots of different skills. Yes. What's important is that for the roles and jobs we ask people to undertake, they get the right training, the right experience, the right supervision. So I think it was absolutely right. We've had those roles anyway. It's just making it more formal. We're trying to make it think like it's a new idea and it's a new policy. But actually, that's happened all the time. What I don't think we can afford to do is turn away anybody who's talented, who has an aptitude for caring and who can do it, simply because they don't fit into one of the boxes we've currently created. I've also been around long enough to think that life's not circular or spiral. It's tidal. We swing from one pendulum to the next. And actually, this will go back. At at some point. I lived through Project 2000. We'll live through this, we'll get through this, and nursing will remain what it's always been, focused on the patient, doing what the patient needs. Doesn't matter what we call it, as long as people have the right skills, education, support, supervision to do it.
Okay, thank you. Stacey, let me come to you as a representative and academic. I mean, a lot of people say the nursing associate role is dangerous. They think it's a risk to patients. So while the providers are very positive and supportive of it, there are some people who are saying, this is a role that's very difficult because there's evidence that suggests that mortality is affected if you don't have a registered graduate nursing workforce. What's your view on the introduction of the nursing associate and the apprentice?
And I think this is where the detail then comes into it. I absolutely support everything that my two colleagues have said. I'm all about talent and widening participation and all of that. But then, of course, it becomes about the detail about implementation. What kinds of skill mix will we see? What kinds of ratios will we see? Will we see one registered nurse with 20 associate nurses? Are there going to be ratios set? I don't know. I think the assumption, I deal with students all the time, and I know there's students in the audience who tell us that despite our best efforts, they struggle sometimes to protect their learning time and their supernumerary. And I know that there's a lot of discussion about the notion of apprenticeships being employees, but also us, in some way, trying to protect their supernumerary status. So for me, I don't think, I'm not really stuck in the philosophical debate about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but actually, can it become a bad thing because of the detail of implementation? That's what slightly worries me. I think we need to remember, we often talk about the balance being wrong between education and practice. It's 50% education, 50% practice. And I was a Project 2000 nurse who was told I wouldn't be able to practice. And my question has always been, well, if the problem is in education, but it's half theory, half practice, and we're not able to practice, then the problem is actually in practice and how you teach people in practice. And I would like to understand how we're going to prevent those kinds of problems being recreated actually in both the apprentice role and the nursing associate role. I'm just slightly worried about what that training is actually going to look like and what that education is going to actually look like.
Okay. I mean, I think you're right to be concerned about what that training education will look like because it does feel very rushed, and even Health Education England's Director of Nursing admits that it's been rushed through at pace, I think is the quote. Gary, do you have anything to add to those comments?
Yes. I mean, in terms of, a couple of things that Stacey mentioned, I'll pick up on as we go along. But I think in terms of the nursing apprenticeship role, many of my academic colleagues seem to be quite against it, and they kind of see it as a step backwards. That, I trained in the early 80s, and I use the word trained advisedly because it was a training rather than an education, and it was an apprenticeship model. And then, of course, we're talking about living through Project 2000 and, moving into the universities, becoming educationalists rather than trainers of nursing. And unlike many of my colleagues, I actually look back on the apprenticeship model and think, if we'd done it properly, that, I think, would have been the best model for nurse education. And by properly, I mean if there had been more support from academics in the clinical areas, if we could have integrated education and practice to a much greater extent, we could have had a kind of a reflective education model where most of the education was actually in practice rather than in the classroom. Ros mentioned the 50% education and 50% practice split. Personally, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think that practice is a great site for education. The educational environment can be a great site for thinking about practice and learning about practice and doing practice. And the kind of the split to me seems very, very artificial. I mean, I would like to see a properly thought out, properly conducted apprenticeship model of education, not training, education. Whether or not this is it, I don't know. I mean, it has been rushed through. We don't really know the details yet. I guess the other thing to say is, from what I've seen of the apprenticeship model of education, I was an external examiner at the Open University for many years, and it sounds exactly like what they've been doing for a long time at the Open University, where their students are normally have already been working in clinical areas, and they do an extended degree in clinical areas. In the clinical areas in which they work, they move around to they rotate around different specialisms. But from my experience as the external examiner to that course, it works very, very well. And they turn out some excellent graduates at the end of their extended program. So I think it could work, and there's a model already in place. Whether or not that's where we'll get to, I don't know. Can I just, oh, sorry, am I hugging this? Can I just mention about the nursing associate? And again, somebody, I can't remember if it was Stacey or Roz, mentioned about the evidence is that mortality is affected as
I mentioned that.
You mentioned that.
I mentioned
it.
Yeah.
There's a higher mortality with lower numbers of graduate nurses. I've looked at that research and I question that. Unlike many of my colleagues, I think we need to ask why there are fewer graduates in areas where there's higher mortality. And there isn't necessarily a causal relationship there. I think, graduates are naturally, and we don't have that many in England at the moment. In Wales, all nurses are graduates now, more or less. But in England, there are still not that many. And they're attracted to, good, already highly functioning units. And so I think to read a causal relationship into that is perhaps a bit premature. I don't necessarily think that, and again, this is my experience from Wales of working with graduates for a long time, I don't necessarily think that graduate nurses provide better care than non-graduate nurses. I think there are a lot more factors than that.
What about the RN Forecast International study on that, though?
Yeah, well, again, I read that and I thought there were quite a few methodological flaws. And again, they were trying to attribute causality. And there was nothing in that study whereby they could actually attribute causality. I mean, what they found was that in areas where there were more graduates, there was lower mortality. Well, yeah, there are lots of reasons why that might be the case. It isn't. They couldn't. The study didn't really enable them to say that graduate nurses caused lower mortality.
Yeah, I mean, some of the areas that they talked about as well, I think, made a difference to what mortality rates would be. They weren't just older people's wards or all completely consistent. So I understand your point, Pete. Catherine, my final question's to you. I guess. There's a lot of talk around. I mean, I chaired a debate recently with some chief nurses, and somebody said there is a risk of introducing this role, or these roles. At the time, we were just talking about the nursing associate and not the apprenticeship, but I think the same rules apply. But the chief nurse said to me, there's a risk of us not introducing them, because currently, everyone can talk about, these might be used for substitution for registered nurses, and that might have, issues to do with, outcomes and quality. But actually, substitution's a moot point. While there are 24,000 nurse vacancies, it's better to have something, somebody providing care and pain relief and taking people to the toilet and doing personal care than it is to have nobody. What's the Patients Association view on nurse and workforce and numbers of people looking after patients?
I suppose we should never forget what happened in Mid Staffordshire and why what happened in Mid Staffordshire actually happened. So Patients Association, yes, we are concerned, and I don't want to obviously repeat many of the things that's already been said by my colleagues. My concern, or our concern, why now? Why are we doing it now? Is there a possibility that we're going to undermine the very sort of talented role of the registered nurse by introducing these new roles into the NHS? Obviously, it is very, very rushed. It'd be really useful to have a lot more of the detail. And again, we don't know what the extent of the tasks that the nursing associates, we don't know what they're going to be doing. We obviously are concerned about compromising patient safety. we would be concerned around the nursing associates seen as a number. So you could, like my colleague said, you could be on a ward of 24 very ill people with one registered nurse, and the numbers made up by nursing associates. I'm not undermining nursing associates. Is it a backward step? So from the Patients Association's point of view, it's always about the experience and the outcome for the individual patients, and we must never compromise that. We understand and appreciate the financial difficulties that the NHS are currently going through, but it can never be at the extent of compromising the safety and well-being of patients.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask as a show of hands, who's in favour of the nursing associate role? Put your hand up if you're in favour. Oh, okay, not really. Who is not in favour of the role? Okay, so more of you. That's interesting. Those of you not in favour, are you nurses? I know one of you is. Yes, are you nurses? No. Okay. All right, we're not going to. Okay, so those are my opening questions. I have plenty more. I'm a journalist. I do this for a living. I can ask questions all night, so don't worry. You've got me as your backup plan in case you have any questions. But does anybody have a question in the audience that they want to ask and is not shy enough to answer? Okay, good. This gentleman down here. Wait for the mic to come. And when the mic comes to you, do you mind... Oh, he's right here. Put your hand up again so they can see you. Great. Thank you. Do you mind telling us who you are and where you are?
My name is Peter Zarvin. I'm a principal lecturer here. I'm also a European, and I'm therefore very interested in what's going to happen in terms of the Brexit scenario. I'd like to see what the panel's view might be.
Okay, what might happen to nursing in the wake of Brexit? Okay, I'm going to suggest Rob, you might be a good place to start.
Happy to start. Thanks for the question, Peter. In our organisation, 20% of our clinical workforce is from the European Union. They're all valued members of the workforce, and we really, really want to keep every single one of them. So it is an important issue that we do need to consider and address. And I think the routes are varying in terms of how do we support people to feel valued and to have a pathway into feeling that they can actually stay in this country. And there's a number of different routes which I think we need to pursue. We've heard in the news a lot of people are actually pursuing residency, and where we can do that, how we can support that. But there are, I think, other ways in which we can support our workforce too. Because I think we also, in the wake of the EU referendum vote, we did see an awful lot of behaviour that came to the fore that we hadn't seen previously, that was very worrying, and people were feeling quite victimised. So I do think there's a range of personal support and other things you need to do to support people, as well as some of the more organisational and pragmatic things, because we absolutely, in the NHS, and I know we've got colleagues here, I can see Sula Wiltshire sitting in the audience, if you're thinking it's bad in the NHS, if you're thinking about residential and nursing home care, we rely on our EU colleagues to really keep that sector working. So we have to do things. We have to influence politically. We have to support individuals, and we have to work as organisations to ensure that people feel welcome. It's a really important issue.
Julie, you're in an area I'm thinking particularly about, obviously the Birmingham and also the hospitals that you're taking over shortly in the merger that goes ahead. You're in an area that is fairly diverse in terms of EU workforce, and you're prime for taking overseas nurses because you've got fantastic airport links, and you therefore get quite a lot of overseas nurses, I know, from talking to people in your hospitals. Is this something that you've seen change the way that people feel at work, and what's your strategy for coping with that?
So I think my role is to speak out and tell people who can influence this just how important to the NHS our overseas staff are, and I've been quite vocal in this, and I've clearly got under the skin of a few people. You've had some letters I've had recently. I think Ross said absolutely we could not do without the staff we have working in the NHS, but as she also mentioned, something happened to unleash some behaviours and attitudes that have maybe been hidden before that were really unpleasant. And some of the staff in my hospitals were a result of that, and we took very, very hard action against patients or anybody who said anything to a member of staff that was in any way discriminatory. But we will not tolerate that kind of behaviour. But I think we're at a very difficult position right now because we're not... There doesn't seem to be a plan around Brexit. There doesn't seem to be anything that we can actually definitively say. Of course, it's fine, everyone's going to stay, because the politicians haven't told us that at all. So I think it's for my role to, A, make sure that in my own organisations, wherever I can, I speak out against inappropriate and bad behaviours. But secondly, that I tell as many people as possible who can influence it, that without our global staff, then the NHS is really going to be the poorer. And it's not just as workforce. We share research information, we share education, we do a whole pile of stuff that health service is far better for. We have the international collaborations. I don't think people realise just how many research collaborations we did with Europe. And I think it would be a shame if we lost that. You know, the NHS is at the forefront and should be at the forefront of scientific research as well. And we cannot lose that because of this. We have to fight for that.
Have you two noticed in your organisations that it's been more difficult to recruit from overseas since
yes.
the... Yeah,
we've had more medical staff than nursing at the moment, but we've had a doctor from Portugal accept a job and then Brexit happened and actually said, I'm not coming. Right. We had a consultant from Southern Ireland who got a job back in Cork and took me to persuade her to stay because it was a very shortish speciality. And we had a lot of other people expressing doubts. I've had to personally intervene with a couple of German surgeons about whether they wish to come over or not. And it seemed to have affected more the medics just at the moment, but I'm sure that that's just the way it's phased, or a statistical blip, really.
Yeah. And what about you?
Yeah, I think in our organisation, the other impact, other than what Julie has already said, has been people potentially beginning to make more active plans to return to their home countries than they were previously thinking about. And that's also a cause for concern, because that's exactly not what you would want. Some of it may have happened anyway, but it may be accelerating some of those plans. So I think that we set out the range of issues, and it is a cause for concern.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Peter, do you feel that answered your question? Great. Are there any more questions? Jennifer, thank you. Don't forget to tell us who you are.
I'm Richard Mandunya. I happen to sit on the NHS Citizens Board. If you do...
Yeah.
It is actually right into my mouth. It's just not working well enough. I said, I'm Richard Mandunya. I sit on the NHS Citizens Board. And the question I have is, if you do the same thing, you always get the same results. So, as such, what has changed that the government should come up with this proposal for nursing associates and apprenticeships and stuff like that? I can deduct that it's really because of funding. And why are we losing nurses? Most likely due to funding and pay freeze on civil servants, and it goes on and on. So, as such, I'm not sure that it should really be a way to go forward to mitigate the losses you're getting in the nursing career professionalism, because then in a few years' time, after all those people have come on, you still have the same results. So where are we really going?
Okay, great question. So I'm going to paraphrase. So I suppose the question is really, why do we need nursing associates and nurse apprentices in the first place, and will we have the same difficulties with retaining those people if we train them in a different way? Will we still have the retention issues that we currently have with our current workforce? That, of course, suggests that you believe that retention is the issue and the reason we've got that. Gary, do you want to give me your views on that?
I mean, I agree with you that I think it is an issue of funding. And, I mean, certainly from listening to some of my colleagues here who are actually far more involved in actual nurse recruitment, I'm not involved at all. Certainly the nursing associate would appear to be an issue of funding, and I think the apprenticeship probably is as well. However, I think that the funding issue could have been addressed in a number of different ways, and it's interesting I think particularly with the apprenticeship, the way that they've chosen to do it. I do think, as I said earlier, I do think there's also some educational value in the apprenticeship system. Whether or not that was intended or not is difficult to say. And also, I suspect that it will attract in some people that may not have been able to have come into nursing under, if the only scheme was the 3-year full-time scheme, and especially now we're losing the bursaries and going to student loans. I suspect that the apprenticeship scheme will attract in some people who wouldn't otherwise have considered nursing. Whether they're more likely to be retained or not, it's difficult to say. I don't know his answer.
Sorry, Stacey.
I was just going to say, in addition to attracting people that might not normally, talented people that might not normally have been able to get in on the degree route, for example, it would also attract and make it easier for people who should not be anywhere near nursing. And if they're members of the public in the room, there'll be people who don't want anywhere near you as a nurse. So, for example, I think on the Associate Nurse Program, you don't even need GCSE maths, and they will be giving drugs. I'm a member of the public, so I'm not even talking about somebody from a university now. I don't want somebody who's not got numerate enough to have GCSE maths to be actually dispensing medication to me. Okay, so I think we need to be very careful that it will, of course, recruit people that perhaps would not have your traditional entry for a degree program. But I think we also need to be careful. I think a lot of the assumption about the shortage of nursing is that we don't have enough places. There are also people who, they come through the interview process and you simply do not want them doing nursing. So even with more places, which there will now be, either through the apprenticeship scheme or the associate role, you probably don't want them nursing you.
Okay, can I jump in there?
Yeah,
there are already plenty of nurses who don't have GCSE maths. My wife's one of them. My wife came in the same time as I did. I came in with a degree and 2 A-levels in maths. She came in on the entry, the entry exam with no maths at all. She practiced for many, many years, very safe. I think she would be quite upset if you said that she isn't safe simply because she doesn't have GCSE maths. I think, it isn't just about academic qualifications.
But there is a basic issue of literacy and numeracy. If you're going to be reading a drug, a drug description or interpreting something from a medical colleague or another nursing colleague, and you make a mistake because of either literacy or numeracy, you can kill somebody. So I get the point that you can be a really, really, really compassionate nurse, and that's really important, and that's really, and obviously we all want to be looked after by compassionate people, but an incompetent one will kill you faster than an uncompassionate one, I would argue. So I would rather, I mean, I'm not suggesting your wife isn't a great nurse, by the way, I'm not at all suggesting that, I'm sure she's totally gifted, and I wouldn't say that. But what I'm saying is, if I was going to be cared for, I'd want somebody to, and I've said this before, I would want somebody to mop my brow with a flannel, but I'd want them to know what was going on underneath it as well. And I'm revealing my personal views on this now on this role, but I do feel that, there is an element of, needing to train somebody, if they're going to be delivering drugs and administering drugs, then you need to train them to do that really, really, really well. And I do believe that I think it's going to come down to the individual trusts who are in charge of employing these people to make sure that they're trained well enough to do that and to interpret instructions given to them. Do you think that's right, Ros? Do you feel that the onus is going to be on you?
It's down to whoever you either will be providing the education yourself or you're doing that in partnership, because you still will have to demonstrate that you are competent to be able to do these things. And you may not have had a formal qualification, but you still have to be able to demonstrate that you've learnt how to be, and people have different access to different sorts of educational experience before they come into nursing, some at an early age and some much more mature. We also rely on people that don't come in necessarily as their first careers to come into nursing. So the issue is what opportunities we offer people in those programs to be able to develop those competencies. If they're not safe when they're in this programme, we firstly should screen out some people who don't have the right attitude. So I don't think we should be recruiting anybody. We should be doing values-based recruitment right from the start. So we should be recruiting people to do the work who demonstrate the right values before we even start. The issue to do with how we then educate people, they should be able to, with the right support, achieve those competencies. And if they can't, we should not sign them off as whatever, a different level if it's an associate nurse to a registered nurse. And then we may need to distinguish between who will do what sort of task in terms of there may be some routine medication where it may be fine to do. We work in community services. Not all medication is overseen by a registered nurse when you work in a community mental health team. So not all activities do need to be overseen by a registered nurse. If you're having chemotherapy, then that quite clearly is required. We're going to have to work and think differently about who can do what and who can do what well. And you know, that issue has not been looked at recently.
Catherine.
Sorry, I agree with some of what Rosa said, but a lot of it I don't, unfortunately, because what I've just heard is describing a team, a fully funded team, where there are lots of people. Who's actually going to be responsible for checking on the competencies? Who's going to be responsible to make sure that nursing associate is actually giving the right drug, the right strength of the drug? Who's going to be supporting the registered nurse? Who's going to be accountable?
Can I answer that? I think it was made very clear from the Bristol Heart Inquiry that right now I am responsible for 3,500 patients and accountability rests with me. So it's my responsibility to make sure that the systems and processes are in place to make sure people have got the education, got the supervision and have been assessed in their competencies, because I'm the one that's ultimately accountable. And I think chief execs, if they ignore this, they ignore it at their own peril. Of course there's professional accountability, but I know the buck stops with me in Birmingham for the hospitals I'm responsible for. So I would take this very seriously to make sure, as you said, it's down to individual trusts. Yes, it is. We rely on universities, we rely on a whole pile of regulation and all the rest of it. But until I'm satisfied that the systems are in place, the people looking after my patients are safe, then they ain't going to be. Looking after them, I mean, not safe.
And I hope that all chief executives feel the same way as you.
I'd like to hope that too.
Yeah. So I know there's a question here, but I'm not sure if we fully answered did we fully answer your question? Because I'm not sure we answered the question about retention, about whether you think we'll be able to retain these people if we get them into the system.
I can say something about what we certainly think about associate nurses is that often people that want to work in the workforce at that level that live in the local community, and I think we feel quite optimistic that therefore if people live locally we're quite likely to retain people. So I would say yes, I think we do think that it is likely that we may well attract and retain people who are local to our workforce and want to work locally. In terms of graduates that come and want to, particularly in a place like Oxford, it's a really attractive place to come and be a student. And because of the complex issues to do with the cost of living in particular, many people, sadly, they go north, they go back to Birmingham or they go to Manchester or whatever, and they don't necessarily, they may stay for their preceptorship.
Birmingham is the Midlands, it is not the north.
No, when I live there, I know, further north.
Southerners say that.
They go further north because it's cheaper to live. So those things, I think, are real challenges for us.
Can I also say, in answer to your question, you're right around it is funding, because I think retention is an issue. So we have an ageing nursing workforce that we are, losing people out down the plug hole, sorry, nurses, bad analogy, losing people down the plug hole, but we're not turning the tap on fast enough. So we didn't train enough nurses, because obviously what happened was the Health Education England went to local trusts and they probably gave them their workforce needs based on what they could afford, not what demand would be. So we've got increasing demand. We haven't increased the amount of funding to get nurses into the system. So retention is one issue, but I also think it was recruitment in the first place as well. We didn't have enough funding for enough nurses, and now we need to somehow plug the gap because we are where we are. So I think that's, it's fair to say that's what happened. This man here has had his hand up for a long time, so thank you. Sorry for being...
John Guy, I'm a governor of Brooks, and I'm the lay chair of a clinical commissioning group. And look, I'm all for competence. I don't think GCSE maths is a particularly good proxy for what nurses would be required to do. One needs a mastery approach, I think, to the assessment of numeracy, and I think that would be a much better way of assessing whether a nurse would be sufficiently competent. But I come out of the education tradition, and teaching assistants were introduced into schools a few years ago, and in some cases that's been poor because they have they're required to take over the role of a teacher. In good practice, however, they work with the teacher, and good practice also has resulted in many of them then seeking the qualification to become a teacher. So there's been a progression route through. And it seems to me that there's an opportunity for places like the Oxford Nurse, in association with Brooks and the hospitals, to look at a progression route through from an associate nurse through to a fully qualified nurse in due course. And certainly in Frimley Park, Frimley Health, which is within my CCG, we're looking desperately at ways in which we can encourage people who enter as a healthcare assistant maybe to be able to work their way through, as they used to be able to do, to a registered nurse position. So is there not an opportunity here? In education, when government came up with initiatives, we used to hijack them and turn them into what we wanted them to be.
I think that's the intention, that the nurse associate dovetails with the apprenticeship. So, and as I understand it, there is a qualification associated with the nurse associate, which can then count as credits towards carrying on and becoming a nurse apprentice. And I would agree with you 100%. I think that it's a viable route through it, but also I think there are lots of valuable learning experiences to be had through doing it that way that maybe you wouldn't get through the traditional route.
Certainly that's the RCN's take on it, that if this is a flexible route into nursing, particularly because people might feel cut off, as Stacey was saying, because of the bursting removal, that's an issue. But I think your question actually, unwittingly or not, maybe, your question unveils something deeper about nursing. Because actually, instead of getting hold of this role and thinking about how we might shape it advantageously for the patient and for the profession, we seem to spend a lot of time bickering about whether it's a good role in the first place anyway. So is that unfair of me, or do you feel that's right? Do you feel that we're not grasping the opportunity to make this better for the patient and better for the profession? Catherine?
We don't know enough about the role. And one of my colleagues said earlier, the detail. Once we know the detail of the role, what this role, what they will and will not be able to do, who they're going to be accountable to, and what kind of learning and training will they have as they sort of progress. I think it was a role that was introduced very, very quickly. It was introduced at a difficult time in the NHS. And why are we introducing it? Why now? Is some of the questions I would like to see answered.
24,000 nurse vacancies is probably the answer.
But then, why are we recruiting? Why are we trying to introduce a new role? Why are we not, as my colleague said, why are we not recruiting and, more importantly, retaining some of the nurses that we do sort of?
I'd argue it starts with M and it ends with Unnie. It starts with M and it ends with Unnie. I think it takes a long time to cook a nurse, doesn't it, really? It's 3 years before they're out and ready. And I think the problem that we have is the problem now. Not suggesting, by the way, that nurse apprenticeships and nurse associates will instantly mean that, Ros and Julie's wards will be, Julie's wards and Ros's community and mental health trust will be flooded with nurses able to go out and care for people instantly. But I think that probably it's a quicker route and a less expensive route than registered nursing.
It's a less expensive route, and I think that's what we must remember. It's a less expensive route, but is it actually the right route to provide the right care, the right support, and is it actually undermining the role of the registered nurse, and is it compromising the safety and well-being of the patient? We don't know as yet, but we need to also think about the safeguards and the unintended consequences.
Okay.
We might have some Twitter questions.
Yes.
Some other questions. We've got a Twitter question, but
Yes, you may go first.
Oh, thanks. I'm Sue West. I'm Dean of Faculty at Buckinghamshire New University. And I've got a two-point question, really, and it's about the apprenticeships. And the first one is we've alluded to already on the panel that the current education within university is 50% practice, 50% in university, but taking on board, obviously, Gary's point as well. What are we expect? What is the panel expecting that's going to be different to what we already offer without pay for the nursing apprenticeship? So what is it we're going to be doing differently that will give us a different outcome? And the second part of my question, which concerned me greatly last week when Jeremy Hunt announced that apprentices won't need to go to university, because they will, and they will be doing a degree. And I think we have to be very clear that the future is that the degree is for all nurses. It will be the same programme and the same content. So that's why I'm asking the question, what will we be expecting that's going to be different from the apprenticeship route that's going to make it better for the future?
Okay, good question. Sort of re-emphasises the question we had earlier, but who wants to take that? Don't all jump at once. Roz, thank you.
I think it's the close association with and alignment within an organisation, and we're working at that anyway here in Oxford in terms of greater alignment with the university anyway, to take back, I think, more ownership in terms of the practice end, because I don't think I did say the 50-50 piece actually, but the focus on practice and making sure, because you do learn how to be a nurse or a doctor through, or a clinical psychologist through working with people who are good role models, and you learn from them how to do things. And I think it's about doing that bit differently, and I think therefore we do need to have different, we need to do redesign within our clinical teams in order to be able to support that. We will have even more practice-based learning through apprenticeships, through nursing associates, and maybe through our new graduate nurses, if we really can get, because the issue is, if people want to come and do nursing, we would want to have those graduate nurses in our workforce. We can't fill our posts. We're not saying we don't want graduate nurses. Certainly we're not saying that in our trust. We want as many as possible, and we want to be able to support their placements well, but it's not a we don't want them or we can't afford them. We can't get those people coming through at the moment because those placements have been capped by the funding routes that we've had to date. Maybe there'll be a whole lot of people that will want to come into nursing, and that will be great, and that will solve some of the issues that we've got. I think the early indications are we're not too sure how that's going to work, but we need to wait and see. So we are saying we want to have graduate nurses, but we're also saying we think there's a different pathway in which you can come into nursing, and they would be very valid roles. But I think it's the practice-based learning is the bit that's got to change. Certainly in our organisation, we're doing a lot of work on that. We will develop, I think, more practice-based Band 6 roles to support education and the delivery of education and supervision in a very different way, and we'll get into redesign in that way. So it isn't about necessarily cost saving, it is about really reprofiling the workforce and doing things differently.
I don't think it's cost saving from a trust perspective per se. I think the comments that were made earlier around about the fact that it's around government funding for the nurse training. I think that's where the cost saving is come in. My earlier point I stand by, which is that it's not a question of substitution if you just can't get nurses in the first place, and I think that's the problem that all trusts are having. There was some questions on Twitter, I think.
There was a Twitter question from Alex Scott, who I think is a student nurse, and the concerns about, and it links to this previous point about mentors not wanting to be mentors currently, and how will this be overcome for apprentices. So I think that whole thing of the motivation of supporting anyone in training is an issue.
You see, and that's my worry, and I'm so pleased to hear both, two big trusts talking about the apprenticeship role and the nursing associate role in the way I would want it to be thought out. But these are probably two of the best directors of nursing chief executives around. Okay, when I talk to students in a context of having the university-linked lecturers and all that, and they're still saying to me they struggle to be able to leave a ward to go and access a previously agreed learning opportunity. They feel that they're part of the numbers and they're not supernumerary. And then I think that, actually, because you remember, if you look at the definition of apprenticeship, it's a period of indentureship. Yes, it is about learning a trade, it is about being employed and then giving time back to that employer, okay? So the very basic, not the really sexy stuff that's in the government documents, the basic definition of an employee, of an apprentice, right? So you are now employed by that ward or that practice area or that placement area, and I know they'll be moving around and so on, and you have one day that's supposed to be a learning day or a learning opportunity, and you're struggling as a student who's actually a university student who's supernumerary, now you're an apprentice, I'm just not convinced you're going to get the time to go out and learn. And because, of course, it is an employer paying for it, I'm not convinced they're going to then say, okay, actually, they haven't done the number of hours, they haven't done the number of tasks that allows me to sign them off. I worry that the people who have to sign off the competencies will come under pressure to sign them off anyway, because they just need to get them through the mill. And, if that's not, and this is what I mean about the detail, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I'm saying I've not heard enough of the detail of how organizations will be held to account, what the standards will be, who will be assessing the programs, who will be assessing the standards, for me to be persuaded that that's not going to happen,
Julie, do you want to come in?
A lot in there to respond to. We've had apprentices not in nursing for some time in the trust, and we've got a special department set up to look after them. I view our role as being one of the largest employers in the Midlands, as being about helping. We know employment status is one of the biggest determinants of health and ill health, so we try and help long-term unemployed people back into health. We've run a whole series of apprenticeships for some time, but they do get their education, they do get all that, but you have to set it up and run it properly, and that's really important. In terms of people signing people off who maybe they shouldn't do, we've had all professions come through that are quite clearly grossly incompetent, and not just in nursing, there's a whole range of things. And when you try and track it back, you find that people, when they're leaving their previous occupation, do sign them off because they're not their responsibility.